Cowboy confronts an 85-year-old Apache. 30 minutes later, the son arrives with his own clan. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The sun hung low over the plains as a lone cowboy rode slowly across the barren land, his mind set on a mission that had been eating away at him for days. His name was John Hawkins, and he was a man driven by the need to settle a score. For years, he had been carrying the weight of a deep, unresolved grudge. It was a grudge born from the brutal and senseless attack on his family by Apache raiders many years ago. His father, once a proud rancher, had fallen victim to the merciless hands of these raiders. His mother and younger brother had barely survived the attack, and the scars of that day lingered on their bodies and in their hearts. John had spent years tracking down the people responsible, hunting them one by one, seeking justice in a world where justice seemed to be in short supply. Today, however, his target was different. Today, he was facing an elderly man, an 85-year-old Apache warrior named Chief Black Crow. This man was rumored to be the one who had led the raid on his family's ranch, the one who had planned the attack that had shattered his life. John's heart raced with anger as he approached the small Apache village where Chief Black Crow lived, a village nestled deep in the rugged mountains, hidden away from the world. The chief was old, frail, and had long since laid down his weapons. But for John, that didn't matter. It was time for him to face the man who had caused so much pain. As John rode closer to the village, the air grew thick with tension. The sight of the chief sitting alone by the fire, his face weathered by years of hardship, filled John with a mixture of fury and a strange sense of anticipation. This was the man who had torn his world apart, the man who had never answered for his crimes. John dismounted from his horse, his boots hitting the earth with a soft thud. He took a deep breath, steadying himself for what was to come. He walked toward the chief, his hand resting on the grip of his revolver, his eyes never leaving the old man's face. As he drew closer, Chief Black Crow looked up, his eyes calm but filled with a wisdom that only came with age. For a moment, the two men stood in silence, each sizing up the other. John could feel the weight of the years pressing down on him, the ghosts of the past whispering in his ears. He had come here for justice, for revenge, but he had no idea what kind of justice he would find. Black Crow finally spoke, his voice gravelly but strong. "You've come for me, cowboy," he said, his gaze unwavering. "But know this, revenge does not bring peace. It only leaves more blood on your hands." John's grip tightened on his revolver, his pulse quickening. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. The cowboy stepped forward, his voice low and filled with determination. "I've come to make you pay for what you did to my family," he said, his words sharp like a knife. "You and your people destroyed everything I loved. Today it ends." But as he prepared to confront the old man, a strange sound broke the silence. Hoofbeats, the sound of horses growing louder by the second. And then, out of the corner of his eye, John saw them. A group of Apache riders, charging toward him, led by none other than Black Crow's son, a man named Running Wolf. The air thickened with tension as the riders drew closer, their faces fierce and determined. John's heart skipped a beat. In that moment, he realized that this confrontation was not just about him and the old man. It was about something much larger, something he wasn't prepared for. The son of Black Crow had come to his father's defense, and with him came an army. 30 minutes after John had confronted the elder Apache, the entire clan had arrived, surrounding him in a sea of warriors. John stood there, outnumbered and surrounded, realizing that what he thought would be a simple act of revenge was about to become a much larger battle. The weight of his actions began to sink in, and the realization hit him like a ton of bricks. He had come here for justice, but what he was about to face would challenge everything he thought he knew about justice, honor, and the true cost of revenge. As the Apache riders circled around John Hawkins, the tension in the air grew unbearable. The sun was now low in the sky, casting long shadows across the plains, and the distant mountains seemed to press in on the small group. John stood at the center, his hand still on the grip of his revolver. But now, with the arrival of Black Crow's son and his clan, he knew that this was no longer just about him and the old man. Running Wolf, the son of Black Crow, rode forward, his face set in a mask of determination. His long, black hair flew behind him like a banner, and his eyes, dark and fierce, locked with John's. The riders behind him were tense, watching every move, but none made a sound. The silence was thick, like the calm before a storm. Running Wolf dismounted with the grace of a man who had spent his life riding, and he stood tall, nearly as tall as his father, though younger, his body strong from years of living in the harsh desert. His presence alone made John feel small, like he was facing an unstoppable force. "You have come to the wrong place, Cowboy," Running Wolf said, his voice deep and steady, but with an edge of authority. "My father does not deserve your vengeance. You do not know the truth of what happened all those years ago." John's heart raced. He had spent years tracking down those responsible for the raid, the attack that had taken his father's life, and now, here he was, face to face with the son of the man he had thought was the cause of it all. The weight of his past decisions began to bear down on him. "I know enough," John spat, his voice thick with anger. "Your people killed my father, destroyed my family, and left us with nothing. I've been hunting you down for years, and now you're here. You think I'm just going to turn and leave?" Running Wolf didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice or react in anger. Instead, he stepped closer, his eyes never leaving John's face. "You think you are the only one who has lost, Cowboy? You think you are the only one who has suffered? My father led that raid, yes. But there is more to the story than you know. There is no honor in your quest for revenge." John's mind raced. What was Running Wolf trying to say? The years of bitterness and rage that had fueled him seemed to falter in that moment. Could there really be more to this than he had been told? Running Wolf continued, his voice softer now, but still filled with a quiet strength. "My father was not the villain you think he is. He fought to protect his people, just as you fight for your family's honor. But your quest for vengeance will only lead to more bloodshed. There are consequences to every action, and you must be prepared to face them." John stood frozen, his mind whirling with conflicting emotions. He had come here expecting a fight, expecting to settle the score with Black Crow and his son, but now he was being told that everything he believed in was wrong. "What do you expect me to do?" John asked, his voice strained. "Let you go free? Let your father's crimes go unpunished?" Running Wolf's gaze softened, and for the first time, John saw a glimmer of understanding in his eyes. "I don't expect you to forgive my father's actions. I don't even ask for that. But I ask you to understand that revenge is not the answer. It will not bring your father back. It will not heal your wounds." For a moment, John felt a strange peace wash over him. The weight of the anger and grief he had carried for so long seemed to lift, just slightly, and he began to wonder if there was a way forward that didn't involve more death. But the riders surrounding him remained silent, watching intently, waiting for their leader's next move. Running Wolf looked over his shoulder at the warriors, and then, without warning, he stepped aside. "You are free to go, Cowboy," he said, his voice calm. "But know this, the next time you come to our land, you will not be met with vengeance, but with peace. We are not the monsters you think we are." John's heart was still pounding, but now, it was a different kind of tension. He could feel the eyes of the warriors on him, and he knew that what happened next would determine not just his future, but the future of his entire family. He had come here for revenge, but now, standing in front of a man who had shown him a different path, he realized that what he did next could either end the cycle of violence or continue it. The weight of the decision was immense, and for the first time in years, John felt truly unsure of what to do. Would he walk away, accepting the peace that Running Wolf offered? Or would he take his revenge, setting off a chain of events that could never be undone? John Hawkins stood in the midst of the Apache warriors, his mind racing as the words of Running Wolf echoed in his ears. The tension in the air was palpable, thick with the weight of the decision that loomed before him. He had come here with the singular purpose of exacting revenge on the man who had destroyed his family. But now, facing Running Wolf and his clan, the simple desire for vengeance had become a tangled web of conflicting emotions. For a moment, John stood frozen, staring at the young Apache leader, who had shown him a peace he had never expected to find. His hand still rested on the grip of his revolver, but now, it felt heavy, almost like an anchor holding him back from the possibility of something different. He had spent so many years consumed by hatred, chasing down the people who had wronged him, that the idea of stepping away from it all seemed both impossible and terrifying. Running Wolf's voice broke through his thoughts again, steady and calm. The past cannot be undone, but the future can be shaped by what we choose today, he said. John looked into the young man's eyes and saw not the rage he expected, but a calm wisdom that seemed far beyond his years. It was the wisdom of someone who had seen the cost of war, who understood that revenge only perpetuated more pain. As the warriors around them waited in silence, John's mind swirled with doubt. Could he walk away from this fight? Could he let go of the need to make someone else pay for the pain he had endured? His thoughts drifted back to his family. Their faces, the sounds of the attack, the night his father had been killed. The images were still vivid, as if they had just happened. But now, something was shifting inside him. Maybe it wasn't about punishing someone else. Maybe it was about healing, about finally letting go of the weight that had crushed him for so many years. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting a fiery glow over the plains, John made a decision. He slowly removed his hand from his revolver and took a step back, his eyes never leaving Running Wolf's. I came here for justice, he said, his voice rough. But maybe what I need is peace. Running Wolf nodded, his face unreadable, but his eyes held a quiet respect. Peace is not a sign of weakness, he said. It is a strength many cannot understand. The warriors behind Running Wolf murmured among themselves, but no one moved. It was clear they respected their leader's decision. John felt the weight on his shoulders begin to lift, just a little. He had made the hardest choice of his life, but in that moment, he realized it was the right one. He had expected to face violence, to fight for retribution, but what he found instead was an opportunity for something far more valuable: understanding. The old wounds that had festered for so long began to heal, slowly but surely. As the last rays of sunlight faded, Running Wolf extended his hand to John. Let this be the end of the bloodshed, he said. John hesitated for a moment before taking the young man's hand in his own. It was a gesture of reconciliation, a promise that the cycle of violence would end here. As they shook hands, John could feel the weight of the years slip away. The past could not be changed, but he had a chance to shape his future. And for the first time in a long time, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: hope. The warriors mounted their horses, and without a word, they began to ride off into the distance. John watched them go, feeling a sense of peace settle over him. It wasn't the peace he had imagined, the kind that came from revenge or victory. No, this was a deeper peace, the kind that came from understanding, from letting go of the pain and the anger that had held him captive for so long. As the last of the Apache riders disappeared into the twilight, John stood there for a long moment, his mind quiet, his heart at ease. He had come here to confront an enemy, but what he had found instead was the possibility of healing. It was a lesson he would carry with him for the rest of his life. The days that followed John Hawkins' encounter with Running Wolf were filled with a strange peace, one that John had never thought possible. As he rode back through the desolate plains, the weight he had carried for so long seemed lighter, as if the burden of years spent seeking vengeance had been lifted, though not without its cost. The land around him, once a constant reminder of his family's tragedy, now seemed open, the horizon stretching before him like a new beginning. Yet, despite the peace that had settled within him, John could not shake the feeling that his journey was far from over. He had come seeking revenge, but now, with the possibility of healing on the horizon, he found himself caught in a world that seemed so much more complicated than he had ever imagined. As he passed the small homestead that had once been his family's, memories flooded back. He remembered his father, a man of few words but boundless strength, and his mother, a woman whose resilience had been the backbone of their small ranch. He had been so consumed by anger and the desire for retribution that he had never stopped to consider what his father and mother might have wanted for him. They had always told him that family came first, that kindness and honor were more important than any grudge. But it had taken him losing everything to finally understand the truth of their words. John stopped his horse and dismounted, taking a long look at the empty land that had once been so full of life. It was hard to believe that it had all been reduced to dust and memories. As he stood there, something unexpected happened. A figure appeared on the horizon, riding toward him. At first, John thought it might be one of the Apache riders, perhaps Running Wolf coming to finish what they had started. But as the rider grew closer, John saw that it was not an Apache warrior, but a familiar face, one he had not expected to see again. It was his brother, Sam. Sam had left the ranch years ago, disillusioned by the violence and the life they had led. John had never heard from him again, and he had assumed that his brother had gone off to live a life far from the pain and suffering they had endured. But here he was, riding toward him, his face as weathered as John's own, but with a look in his eyes that seemed to carry a story of its own. "I thought you were gone for good," John said, his voice rough with emotion. "I didn't think I'd ever see you again." Sam smiled, though it was a tired, sad smile. "I figured I had a lot to answer for," he said, his voice low. "But after hearing about what happened to you, I couldn't stay away." John felt a lump rise in his throat as he watched his brother approach. For years, he had thought of nothing but his own pain, his own loss. But now, with Sam standing before him, he realized that his brother had been living with his own scars, his own regrets. The two men stood in silence for a moment, neither sure of what to say next. Finally, John spoke. "I've been wrong, Sam. All these years, I've been chasing ghosts, trying to make someone else pay for our family's pain. But it's not about revenge. It never was." Sam nodded slowly, as if he had known this all along. "You're not the only one who's been hurting," he said quietly. "But you can't undo what's been done. What we can do now is honor what's left of our family and build something new. Maybe it's time for both of us to stop running from the past and start living for the future." John looked at his brother, the man who had once seemed so distant, so far removed from the life they had shared. In that moment, he saw not just the scars of the past, but the possibility of something more, a future built on forgiveness and understanding. As they rode together toward the sunset, John knew that the road ahead would not be easy. But for the first time in years, he felt that it was a road worth traveling. He had found peace not in revenge, but in the simple act of letting go. And with his brother by his side, John Hawkins was ready to face whatever came next, knowing that he was no longer alone. The following days were filled with a kind of peace that was unfamiliar to John Hawkins. It had been years since he had felt this calm, and though the decision to let go of his quest for revenge had not been easy, it was proving to be the right one. He rode alongside his brother Sam through the familiar yet changed landscape, the setting sun casting long shadows across the open plains. For the first time, John allowed himself to look at the land without the weight of his past clouding his judgment. It had always been a symbol of loss, but now, it was a place of possibilities. Sam, riding beside him, had fallen into a thoughtful silence, just as John had. The two of them shared the same grief, the same history, but now there was a shared understanding between them that had never existed before. For all the years of separation, the pain, the anger, it seemed as if nothing had ever truly divided them. It was a strange comfort to know that they had both come to this moment in different ways, but that they had arrived at the same conclusion. Peace, a word that had once seemed so distant. Sam was the first to break the silence. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "Maybe it's time we rebuild. Not just the ranch, but everything. We can start fresh." John glanced over at his brother, his mind replaying the thought that had crossed his mind only a moment ago. Rebuilding wasn't just about land or property. It was about healing, about starting over. "You really think we can?" John asked, unsure if he was ready for such a monumental task. Sam nodded, his eyes focused on the horizon. "We've been through too much to keep running. We owe it to ourselves, to the people we lost, to make something good out of all this mess." The words struck John deeply, more than he had expected. They were right. He had spent so much time in the past, focusing on the pain, the loss, and the need for vengeance, that he had never once considered the possibility of truly moving forward. He had been so determined to right the wrongs that he forgot there was life beyond the anger. As they continued riding, John began to imagine what that life could look like. It wasn't going to be easy, and it would certainly take time, but it was possible. They had the strength of family, the land, and most importantly, the opportunity to make peace. It was a daunting thought, but it was also the most hopeful one he had ever had. By the time they reached the small homestead, the stars had begun to appear in the sky, their faint light casting a soft glow on the earth. John dismounted and stood for a moment, gazing out at the land. It seemed more vast than ever, but somehow, it didn't feel so lonely anymore. Sam joined him, and for a long time, they stood there in silence, side by side. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was a silence filled with understanding. The world around them might have been full of strife, but here, in this moment, they were free. The next few days were spent gathering supplies and planning, and with each passing hour, John's resolve grew stronger. He and Sam worked together, their bond strengthened by their shared experiences. They weren't alone anymore. They had each other, and together, they could face whatever came next. News of their return spread quickly through the small community, and soon, neighbors who had long since distanced themselves began to visit. There was a mix of surprise and cautious optimism in their eyes. They had heard of the Hawkins brothers' return, but they didn't know what to expect. To their surprise, John and Sam welcomed them with open arms. There were no grudges, no accusations. There was only the future. As the weeks passed, the small homestead began to take shape again. It was a slow process, but it was progress. The fields began to be cleared, the house repaired, and the land, once a symbol of loss, began to feel like home once more. It was in these quiet moments of work, of rebuilding, that John found a sense of fulfillment he had never known before. The road ahead was still uncertain, and there would be challenges, but for the first time in a long time, John felt that he was on the right path. He had let go of the anger, the need for vengeance, and in doing so, he had found something even more powerful, a future, not just for himself, but for his family. He had come full circle, from a man consumed by rage to a man who understood that true strength came from forgiveness and the courage to move forward. And as the sun dipped below the horizon one evening, casting its final golden light on the land, John Hawkins knew that he had finally found the peace he had been searching for. The months passed, and the small ranch that John and Sam Hawkins had rebuilt began to thrive once more. The land that had once been a silent witness to tragedy now blossomed with new life. The crops grew tall and green, and the sound of livestock echoed across the plains, filling the air with the promise of a new beginning. Neighbors, once skeptical of the Hawkins brothers' return, now found themselves drawn to the farm, offering help and support. There was a sense of community slowly being rebuilt, just as the ranch itself was. For the first time in many years, John felt like he belonged somewhere again. He no longer carried the heavy burden of revenge or regret. His mornings were spent working the fields, and his evenings by the fire, talking to Sam about everything and nothing at all. There was an ease in the air now, a quiet contentment that John had never known before. It was as though the land itself was healing, just as they were. Yet, despite all the progress, something lingered in the back of John's mind. It was a small voice, faint but persistent, reminding him that there was still a part of his past that needed to be addressed. The peace he had found was real, but it was not yet complete. He had made amends with his family, and he had reconciled with the Apache, but there was still one final confrontation to be had. The day came when a rider appeared on the horizon, kicking up dust as he approached the ranch. John recognized the silhouette even before the rider came into full view. It was Running Wolf. The young Apache leader had not been forgotten. Despite the peace they had agreed upon, there was still unfinished business. Running Wolf dismounted his horse and walked toward John, his expression unreadable. "I have come to speak with you," he said, his voice steady and calm. John nodded, not knowing what to expect, but sensing that this was the moment he had been dreading. "I've heard of your work here," Running Wolf continued. "The land is prospering, your family is healing, but there is still something between us, something that remains unresolved." John felt his heart race. He had hoped that after the confrontation with Black Crow's son, the matter would be laid to rest. But now, standing face to face with Running Wolf once more, he realized that the final piece of the puzzle was still missing. "What is it you want, Running Wolf?" John asked, his voice calm, but with an edge of uncertainty. The Apache leader paused for a moment, his gaze steady. "My father led a raid that caused great pain," he said. "I do not ask for forgiveness, nor do I expect it, but I ask for the opportunity to make amends, in whatever way I can. What happened cannot be undone, but perhaps we can work together to prevent it from happening again." The words hung in the air, and for the first time since their meeting, John felt a shift in his understanding. Running Wolf wasn't asking for forgiveness or trying to right the wrongs of the past. He was offering a chance for a future where both sides could coexist, where peace could be more than just a dream. It was a hard offer to accept, but in that moment, John understood. "I have no hatred left in me," John said, his voice steady. "But peace is something that requires more than just words. It requires action. If we are to move forward, it cannot be with the past hanging over us. We must build something new, together." Running Wolf nodded, his expression softening. "That is what I seek as well," he said. "A future, not bound by bloodshed, but by understanding." John stood there for a moment, the weight of the past lifting with every word that passed between them. This was the true meaning of peace. Not a peace that was won through force or vengeance, but one that was forged through mutual respect and the willingness to let go of old wounds. The two men shook hands, a gesture that symbolized not just the end of their conflict, but the beginning of something new. The land stretched out before them, vast and endless, and for the first time in John's life, he felt that he was ready to embrace it. The journey had been long and painful, but it had brought him to this moment of clarity. He no longer needed to seek vengeance. He no longer needed to run from the past. It was time to build a future, one where peace and understanding were the foundations. As the sun set behind them, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, John Hawkins knew that the road ahead would not always be easy. But for the first time, he felt that he was on the right path, walking side by side with Running Wolf, as brothers in the pursuit of something greater than themselves. Months passed, and John Hawkins felt a deep change settling within him. He had come to terms with his past, and, for the first time in many years, he was able to look ahead with a sense of purpose and peace. His brother Sam had been by his side throughout it all, helping him rebuild not just the ranch, but their lives. The land, once a symbol of loss, had transformed into a thriving homestead, full of promise and new beginnings. As spring approached, John found himself out in the fields, working with Sam and the few neighbors who had come to offer their support. The soil was rich with possibility, and the crops that had once struggled to grow now flourished. For the first time, the ranch felt like home again. Yet, despite all the progress, there was still one lingering thought in John's mind: the Apache. Though he had made peace with Running Wolf and Black Crow, the thought of the old wounds between their people still weighed on him. He knew the history between his family and the Apache, and he understood that forgiveness could not undo the violence of the past. But he also knew that reconciliation was the only way forward for both sides. It was a thought that kept him awake at night, the weight of it pressing on his chest like a storm cloud. One evening, as he sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of purple and gold, John heard the familiar sound of hooves approaching. At first, he thought it might be another neighbor, but as the rider came into view, he realized it was Running Wolf. The young Apache leader rode alone, his face serious and unreadable. John stood up slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. He had not expected to see Running Wolf again so soon, but he had learned not to be surprised by the unexpected. "I've come to speak with you," Running Wolf said, dismounting and walking toward John. "There is something I must tell you, something I should have said before." John nodded, motioning for him to sit. The two men had shared a bond of understanding, but there was always more to be said. "What's on your mind?" John asked, his voice steady, though he felt the familiar tension returning. Running Wolf hesitated for a moment, his gaze distant, as if he were gathering his thoughts. "You've shown kindness to my people, and for that, I am grateful. But there is still a divide between us, one that cannot be easily healed. There are those among my tribe who will never accept the peace we've made, who believe that the old ways must be upheld, and that our land should be fought for, not shared." John felt a knot form in his stomach. He had known there would be resistance, but hearing it from Running Wolf made it feel real in a way it had not before. "What do you want me to do?" John asked, his voice quiet. Running Wolf looked at him, his eyes filled with both sadness and determination. "I want you to know that peace is not something that can be forced. It must come from both sides. I have made my choice to seek peace, but it will take time. And I ask for your patience and your understanding as we move forward." John nodded slowly, understanding the gravity of what Running Wolf was saying. The path to peace would not be easy, and it would not happen overnight. But it was a path worth walking. I understand, John said, his voice firm. I'll stand by you. Whatever it takes. Running Wolf gave a small nod of approval, and for a moment, there was an unspoken bond between them. A bond forged not by bloodshed, but by mutual respect and a shared desire for something better. Thank you, Running Wolf said quietly. You have done more than you know. As the two men stood together, watching the sun dip below the horizon, the land stretched out before them, wide and open, full of both promise and challenge. John knew that the journey was far from over, but he also knew that he was no longer walking it alone. The road ahead would be long, and there would be obstacles to overcome, but with patience and understanding, they could build a future that honored both the past and the present. The cycle of violence had been broken, and in its place, there was the possibility of something new, a future where both sides could coexist, not as enemies, but as allies. And as the stars began to twinkle in the sky, John Hawkins finally felt that the weight he had carried for so many years had been lifted, replaced by something far stronger, hope. Time passed, and John Hawkins continued to walk the road of reconciliation, alongside his brother Sam and the Apache people. The peace they had worked for, though fragile at times, began to take root in ways that neither John nor Running Wolf had fully anticipated. The land flourished, the crops grew strong, and the animals grazed peacefully on the hills once torn by conflict. The sound of hooves, once a harbinger of battle, now echoed through the valley as neighbors, both Apache and settler, came together to help each other. The bonds of old grudges were slowly being untangled, one small act of kindness at a time. Yet, John knew that peace was not something that could be taken for granted. It was a living, breathing thing, one that needed constant care and attention. He had learned that peace could not be forced, but it could be nurtured, like the land they now worked together. There were still moments of doubt, and still some who could not let go of the old ways. But every time those doubts crept in, John would look out over the land, the fields rich with life, and he would remember why they had chosen this path. As the seasons changed, the work on the ranch became easier. There was always something to be done, whether it was repairing the fences or gathering the harvest, but for the first time, it felt like they were working towards something greater than just survival. It was about building a future where the past no longer held the power to shape their lives. One afternoon, as John and Sam worked together by the barn, a rider appeared on the horizon. John's first instinct was to reach for his rifle, but then he saw the rider's silhouette. It was Running Wolf, once again, but this time he was not alone. Behind him, several Apache warriors rode, their faces calm, their eyes not filled with the usual distrust that had once been a constant in their encounters. They had come not with weapons, but with something far more powerful, an offering of goodwill. As Running Wolf approached, he raised his hand in a gesture of peace. John stood up from his work and walked toward him, his heart racing for reasons he could not quite explain. "We have come to speak with you," Running Wolf said, his voice calm but heavy with meaning. "There is something we must offer you, something we have been preparing for a long time." John looked at the group of Apache warriors behind Running Wolf. They were not here to fight. They were not here to demand anything. They were here to share something, a promise of unity, of a shared future. "What is it?" John asked, his voice steady but curious. Running Wolf stepped forward, holding out a bundle wrapped in cloth. It was a symbol, something deep and ancient, one that carried the weight of their people's traditions. He unwrapped the cloth to reveal a beautifully crafted, intricately woven blanket. It was not just a gift, but a gesture, a recognition of what they had accomplished together. "This is a symbol of the bond we have forged," Running Wolf said. "It is a gift from my people to you, a token of our promise to work together, to never forget what we have overcome, and to honor the peace we have built." John took the blanket in his hands, feeling the weight of it, both physically and metaphorically. This was not just a piece of cloth. It was a representation of everything they had worked for, the bloodshed they had left behind, the forgiveness they had granted, and the future they now shared. "Thank you," John said quietly, his voice filled with emotion. "This means more than you can know." Running Wolf nodded, his face serious but softening with the recognition of their shared understanding. "It is only the beginning," he said. "The path ahead will not always be easy. There will be challenges, but we must face them together. As the Apache warriors turned and began to leave, John stood there, holding the blanket in his arms. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the ranch, and in that moment, John knew that the future was no longer something to fear. It was something to build, something they could all share. He turned back to Sam, who had been watching from a distance, his face filled with quiet pride. "We've come a long way," John said, his voice strong but calm. "And there's still so much more to do." Sam smiled, clapping his brother on the back. "We'll do it together," he said. And for the first time, John truly believed it. The road ahead was uncertain, but they were no longer walking it alone. As the warriors disappeared into the distance, John Hawkins knew that they had finally found the peace they had been searching for, not in the absence of conflict, but in the strength of their unity and in the willingness to build something new together. Years passed, and the ranch flourished under the steady hands of John and Sam Hawkins. The scars of the past had healed, and in their place, a new legacy was being built. The land that had once been a symbol of loss now thrived with life, rich and full, much like the bond between John and the Apache people. Together, they had made something that many thought impossible, a lasting peace. John often found himself walking the fields, taking in the fresh air, and reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. He would pause now and then, his gaze sweeping over the ranch that had once seemed like a far-off dream, a place of hope he never thought he would find. His brother Sam, always by his side, had become not only a partner in work but in life. They shared the fruits of their labor, but more importantly, they shared a sense of purpose, of something much larger than themselves. And through it all, the Apache, who had once been his enemies, were now his allies and friends. They had worked alongside one another, rebuilt not just homes, but the very foundation of a shared future. It wasn't easy. There were moments of tension, disagreements, and old fears. But every time they faced a challenge, John remembered the lessons he had learned, the importance of understanding, the value of forgiveness, and the undeniable strength that came from unity. Running Wolf had kept his word, as had the rest of the Apache. Their presence was not one of threat, but of cooperation. They, too, had transformed. From the warriors who once rode in to take what they wanted, they had become partners, not just in work, but in preserving the land they shared. Together, they had protected it, fought for it, and helped each other in ways neither side had imagined possible. There were no longer any divisions between the settlers and the Apache. Children played together, families ate together, and the land, once scarred by war, was now a place of peace and plenty. But even as things had changed, the past was never far from John's mind. There were days when the memories of the violence, the pain, and the loss still weighed heavily on him. He often thought of his father, the man who had fought so fiercely to protect his family and their land. He wondered if his father would have been proud of what he had done, of the peace they had created. On one such evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky, painting the world in a wash of oranges and reds, John stood on the porch, watching the horizon. Beside him, Sam stood, silent as ever. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" John said, his voice soft but full of meaning. Sam nodded. "We have, but there's more to do." John glanced at his brother, unsure of what he meant. "What do you mean?" Sam pointed toward the horizon, where the mountains met the sky. "There will always be challenges ahead. More people to bring together, more bridges to build. But we've learned something important, haven't we?" John's gaze followed his brother's finger, and for the first time, he saw it. Not just the land, not just the ranch, but the potential for more. More peace, more understanding, more growth. "Yeah," John said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "We've learned that peace is something you build, one step at a time. It doesn't happen overnight, and it's never easy. But it's worth it." The two men stood together in silence, their hearts full. They had done what so many thought impossible. They had created a future. Together, they had turned the land from a battleground into a home. And that was something no one could take away from them. It wasn't just about the ranch anymore. It was about the bond they had forged with the Apache, the community they had built, and the peace they had worked so hard to achieve. They had made something that would last, something that would endure long after they were gone. And as the stars began to fill the night sky, John Hawkins felt a deep sense of contentment settle over him. He had found what he had been searching for, not just peace, but purpose. A future built on forgiveness, cooperation, and the strength to overcome the past. The road ahead would be long, but it was a road worth traveling. For John and his family, and for the Apache who had once been their enemies, the journey had only just begun. In this captivating tale of redemption, forgiveness, and the power of peace, John Hawkins finds himself at the crossroads of a troubled past and a hopeful future. As he works to rebuild his life on his family's ranch, the journey of reconciliation takes center stage in this gripping piece of Western storytelling. What begins as a search for vengeance turns into a profound realization that the true strength lies in letting go of past wounds and embracing cooperation. The story intricately weaves together the complexities of old rivalries between settlers and the Apache, showing that even the deepest conflicts can be resolved through understanding and mutual respect. With every chapter, the story of John's transformation reflects the timeless themes that make Western stories so compelling: struggles for survival, personal growth, and the pursuit of justice in a harsh world. The evolving relationship between John and the Apache leader Running Wolf offers a fresh perspective on these traditional Western stories, highlighting how peace can emerge from the ashes of conflict. As John faces the challenge of bridging the gap between cultures, this tale takes readers on a journey of self-discovery and healing, ultimately showing that peace is not just a dream, but a tangible reality that can be built, one step at a time. Western stories like this remind us of the importance of second chances, the power of community, and the idea that true justice comes not from revenge, but from reconciliation. As the sun sets over the land they both call home, John and Running Wolf stand as examples of how Western stories can evolve from tales of violence into powerful narratives of peace and unity, proving that even in the most difficult of times, there is hope for a brighter future. This story is a perfect example of the kind of Western stories that transcend time, offering lessons that resonate with us today.